Hello, everyone. Welcome to Play It Forward. You are listening to WUSB Stony Brook 90.1 and 107.3 FM. I'm Allison, and alongside of me is my co-host, Kurt Hall. And today we are bringing you a very special episode of Play It Forward. World-renowned actor Michael Keaton has won several awards, including his first Emmy for his performance in the Hulu series Dopesick. The Batman actor portrays a hard-working doctor in a small mining town who gets addicted to the pain pills he starts prescribing. Today on Play It Forward, we have an exciting interview with the man who is the real-life inspiration behind that compelling character, Dr. Stephen Loyd. Dr. Loyd is the Chief Medical Officer at Cedar Recovery in Nashville, Tennessee. Recognized as an advocate for action by the Office of National Drug Control Policy, Dr. Loyd has delivered over 500 lectures on opioid use disorder and controlled substance prescribing. In recovery from opioid addiction since 2004, Dr. Loyd's personal journey inspired his work in addiction treatment and policy. He is the medical director of a major treatment facility and works at an inner-city rehab center for indigent women, dedicated to both treatment and public health policy. Kurt and I had the honor of meeting Dr. Loyd at FAD, Fentanyl Awareness Day, on May 7th. So on behalf of Play It Forward, we'd like to warmly welcome you, Dr. Stephen Loyd. Thank you for being with us here today. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, other than what I already told them?
Thanks, Allison. It's my honor. No, you did a great job. I hate those intros when, the most important thing about me is my lived experience and the things that I've, noticed and watched over the last, almost 20 years in recovery. All the other stuff is what it is, but the important work is done because of the systems of care that I see and the gaps in the systems of care that I see that I think we can address and prevent unnecessary death.
It's amazing the work that you're doing. But for our listeners, Michael Keaton portrayed your character in the Emmy Award-winning Hulu series, Dopesick. How did you feel Michael Keaton did? How did he portray your character?
I thought he was excellent. It's really a strange thing to see that, some of the worst moments of your life, on TV in front of millions of people. And so when we were doing that, and how I got involved in it was from the writer of the book Dopesick. Beth Macy is a friend of mine, and she got me involved in the production of the Hulu series. And when we were writing it, and I was helping with that part of it, I'm not a writer, don't hear that wrong. I just told stories, but didn't know who was going to be cast. Matter of fact, I didn't even realize, how much money they had, who they're going to get. And so when it turned out that it was Michael Keaton, I was pretty excited about that because I think he's a phenomenal actor. Career has certainly borne out, and who can say, how many people can say that Batman played him, right?
Batman, that's right. That's amazing.
Yeah, my standing joke is he was a hack before he got my role, and I shot him to stardom, but obviously not true. So I thought he did a great job. I was particularly pleased with the closing scene of the series and how they tied it up, because I thought he did a phenomenal job with that.
How accurate was his portrayal of your character?
It was really weird. It was strangely accurate. And sometimes I look at it and it's weird because I didn't tell him some of the stuff. So even the way that he dressed, and back when I was practicing in East Tennessee, that's exactly how I dressed. And I don't know how Beth could have known that. I know she didn't. So it, even, right down to his dress, I just thought it was extremely accurate. People ask me all the time, so, well, how much of that was Hollywood and how much was true? And there's only two things with regards to me that were a tiny bit Hollywood. One is I didn't relapse. I haven't relapsed. And we did that intentionally. And I talked to Beth and Danny Strong about it, that I felt like that was, that the character needed to relapse. I mean, we see that a lot. The only reason I haven't relapsed in almost 20 years is I had an unbelievable support system.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't have that. So I think his relapse is a more accurate portrayal of how addiction goes. And then the other thing is I never bought a school bus. He buys a school bus because he's taking people to treatment. And I told you and Kurt this when I was up in Long Island, is that I should have bought a school bus, as many people as I've taken to treatment, but I didn't buy a school bus. The rest of it's accurate.
Not too
Wow.
late to. What did it feel like to watch some of the more difficult scenes in the series?
Yeah.
Like you said, have all your worst moments portrayed to the nation, basically, the world.
And how did that make you feel?
Well, Kurt and Alice, I was like everybody else watching it, right? I didn't know what made the cut, what wound up on the editing room floor and what makes the series. And so, even though I told them my stories, and I told them more than are in there, obviously. And so watching it, I was like everybody else. And so, Kurt, it was a strange feeling, one of the worst days of my life are portrayed the night that the Keaton character goes and buys drugs from his patient in the middle of the night, and the patient shows him, how to rub the coating off the pill so you could snort it. And that all happened. That's all real. And so it was a strange thing to watch. And, I've told this story so much through the years. I'm not going to say that I'm numb to them because I'm always worn out when I'm done, but I've learned how to do it in a way that I think is pretty healthy. And so what the real challenge for me with watching it with my wife, because she doesn't live in the world that I live in every day, right? I have this work world, which I really love, and she doesn't do that every day. And so I think some of the scenes in there were pretty tough on her.
Actually, our friend that Carol Trottier, she and I were talking last week. We were at the fentanyl summit that the Suffolk County DA Ray Tierney put on. And she was talking about the guilt that she has experienced or still carries with her for not feeling like she didn't do enough for her son who passed away. And we were both curious do you carry guilt from some of your times as a doctor and dealing with patients?
Oh yeah. And first of all, Carol is on my Mount Rushmore. So I would really have a hard time believing she didn't do everything she could, although I get it as much as I can without losing the child. So, yeah, and Kurt, this is so strange you asked that question. 2 days ago, I was in a local jail here just south of Nashville, and I met some really wonderful women. These women are participating in a jail program in rural Tennessee, which you can't even believe this exists, but it exists because of this lieutenant named Chris Cook, who is a unicorn and has a great heart, and he's helping these women as they're incarcerated. And I went out and spent the day with them, actually. And as I was talking to them and realized what they were in there for and some of the felonies that they had, and I had all those.
Yeah.
I did. I mean, so the times that I feel guilty are around that. I feel like, 20 years out that I was treated differently because of privilege. I'm a doctor. I cost a lot of money to my taxpayers paid for my education. Instead of getting let out in handcuffs, they got me help and put me back in my job. One of the stories, one of the young ladies told me, I got to share with you because it's still eating at me. I'm still having trouble with it right now. I asked her about how she got started, and she was in the 7th grade, and with a good student, athlete, and the whole deal. And a new kid came to school and brought some weed, and they smoked weed at their school in the 7th grade. And when they got caught, they called the cops, and they came and let them out in handcuffs. And I'm still trying to get that in my brain, because that was kind of the start for her. And keep in mind, this is a really bright young lady. She's 27 now. She has a nursing degree. She's an LPN.
Wow.
And as I was sitting there listening to this, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many felonies I'm sure I've committed in one form or another, and just given grace and a chance at redemption without, handcuffs and incarceration. And so those are the times I feel really guilty.
Well, and we spoke about that when you were up here, and the difference in the way that you were treated as opposed to others based on you're a doctor, and the care that you received as opposed to so many others that aren't so fortunate.
Yeah. It's what put me where I am today, Kurt, because the weirdest thing is I started to see it right at the very beginning. Even when I was dope sick and going through withdrawals, I already started to see it. And it was just amazing to me because, I actually kept a diary of my withdrawals, believe it or not.
Really?
So I can.
Did you?
I did. And I'm really glad, because some of the writing is pretty shaky, but I can read it. And I noticed the difference right from the start, because you got to remember, when I went to detox, now my treatment was different, but when I went to with the medical side of it, I was in with 23 other people
Right.
who had no idea I was a doctor. And so they were from all walks of life. And so, and I didn't tell anybody, I sat there and got treated like everybody else. And I started to notice the difference right from the start, because I thought when I went in there that all of us, or 24 of us, all of us were in the same program, and we would leave there and go to a treatment center, wherever. And early on, I realized, oh my gosh, that's not the case. And when I started to really figure it out, there's only one person out of the 24 who got to leave a medical unit and go for the treatment and the help that we really needed, and that was me.
Yeah.
And so I saw that right from the start.
So your experience with this is just so important, because you're not only looking at the eyes of an addict, but now as a medical doctor. And I can't imagine what the stigma must feel like. I applaud you for your courageousness to be open about this, because I do believe you're breaking barriers.
Allison, that took a long time, because for the longest time, it's one of these deals where what I was seeing in my experience didn't match up with what I was reading. Okay. And there's kind of this hierarchy in recovery. It's really ego based on time. How long you been in recovery, right? It drives me nuts. I tell people, well, for me, the one that got up earliest this morning's been in recovery the longest. I got up at 4:30. What time did you get up? I mean, I don't measure it any other way.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at this and I'm seeing it, I didn't feel like I had enough time to be able to say anything. And for probably, I don't know, 6, 7 years, 8 years, I, sang the company line. And I finally got to a point where when I was watching kids die unnecessarily, I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't sit in the room with the emperor naked and not say anything. And so I haven't. I haven't done that in probably 12 or 14 years now. And because I believe that the only way out of it, and I'll give you and Kurt this, I haven't given you this yet, but one of the ways I live my life is by the Stockdale paradox. And Admiral James Stockdale was actually a Medal of Honor winner. And Admiral Stockdale said this, he said, we're going to confront the most brutal facts of our current reality, whatever they might be, while retaining faith that we will prevail in the end, regardless of the difficulty. And I really just started applying the Stockdale paradox to what I was seeing. And the only way that I knew to go about it was, I'm going to tell you the truth as I see it, even if it hurt, while keeping faith. And you all see me. I mean, you know that the smile on here is not fake. I mean, this is now. I believe that we will come out on the other side. I believe that there will be way too many people suffer and die before we do. And, meeting you guys, Allison and Carol and the folks I met in Long Island,
right,
all lost their kids. And we're not going to be able to fix that. There's no fixing that you take that to your grave. But what we can do is use those deaths to try to prevent other families from having to suffer the same consequences. That's why I like the Trail of Truth so much. Alexa is a hellraiser. And so she's telling the truth. She sees it and she's right. I read articles and I see these learned people from Stanford and Hopkins and, and they're giving me these models, and those are great. And we need that. That's not the reality of what these kids are facing out there.
Right. You're now the medical director of a large addiction treatment facility in Nashville, and you work in an inner city rehabilitation facility serving women. Can you talk to us about that role? And that stuck with me a lot. And the fact that, some of the points that you were making about doctors just not treating women or how few do, and the little, it seems like there's a polarization of help for them, and if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Women in recovery.
Yeah, well, Kurt used it universal, and I could even make an argument for universal, Kurt, but we'll stick with addiction. And this is me, and guys, these are my experiences and how I see things. And so, single mommies to me make the world go round, right? I mean, how many single daddies you see out there? I mean, there's a few, and I don't want to offend the single dads out there, but single mommies, I mean, they make the world go round. And I was appalled when we started looking at treatment of these women. I started getting them in pregnancy, and there was like, they would say these horrible things about them. And then I would say, well, what kind of program do we have to help them? Well, we don't treat them. I was like, well, what? Again, another instance of telling the emperor that he's naked. I was like, hold on
Right.
a second, right? So how about before we go throwing rocks, we look at ourselves a little bit here? Me included, right? Me included. I'll include myself in that. I had to educate myself. And so, it was just a population that was just completely underserved. If they were pregnant, they had children, and I don't want to come across as controversial, because I still go to 12-step meetings. I am a 12-step guy. I'm an abstinence-based recovery guy. All right. All those things. But I'm going to tell you this. I don't know how many times that I have heard, oh, anything you put in front of your recovery, you lose. Okay. And I get it. You tell me what single mommy is going to drop her kids and run off somewhere to get help.
Such a great point. So, yep.
And it's going against everything that we're trying to help them with, right? Because the whole recovery process is about accountability, personal responsibility, improvement, right? Progress, not perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we're telling them, oh, well, forget about your kids.
Yeah.
Right. And I just was blown away with that. So we got several facilities here in Nashville, where I live, that allow the patients to bring their children with them. And so when one of those called me up and said, hey, we need a medical director, and by the way, it doesn't pay anything, I jumped at it, right? Because it's a good thing. It's not to pay that. That's not the point.
Of course. No, I know.
The point is that I jumped at it because look at what they're doing here, right? You can come to treatment. You can get help yourself. And oh, by the way, while you're here, we're going to help you with your kid.
You're amazing.
Or they're going to go to local schools, Metro Nashville schools, which they do go to. I've seen them, right? I've seen them take them to schools and bring them home. They live just like everybody else. They have apartments, right? But while they're in school, their moms are getting help, and we're giving them a chance at life.
That's a beautiful, amazing program. I raised my daughter as a single mother, so I know the struggles of a single mom. And I can't imagine being in the throes of addiction during that time. But I would be curious on a follow-up study of those kids, because they are literally taking part in the recovery process as well. And I wonder how many of those kids, because they're learning this at most likely a very young age, how many of them will really be, or how safe is it to say that they're protected? I'd be curious to know how much influence that bears in this program.
Well, it's like anything else, we need to study it and we need to look at it. And what I talked about when I was with you guys, I mean, this is the only field of medicine I know that we don't look at outcome.
Yes.
Now I know there are people out there that no, you don't, right? Because you don't include the people that you don't, that you lose, the people that don't come back to your reunion groups or whatever. And I want to look at that. I want to look at, what happens with these kids as they get older. The only thing I can speak to are my kids, right? Who watched me go into recovery and are now grown. And I'll argue this all day long. The first, and I'm a prevention guy. I told you guys when I was up there and I got to see your place, I am a prevention guy. I have to talk about medicine all the time because it's controversial, and syringe exchange programs because it's controversial. I am a prevention guy. Okay.
Yeah.
Here.
The first prevention is treating mommy and daddy. I was in a local jail here. It's been a few years ago when I was teaching. I had male inmates on one side, female on the other. There's a wall separating them, and I'm in the front, so I can see both, but they can't see each other. Idea of the setup. And I was teaching them about addiction and neonatal abstinence syndrome, which is babies being born dependent. And you should have seen this room, right? And these are people who are incarcerated, right? They got flames coming up the side of their neck, big ear gauges, the prison garb, all the stuff, right? And I'm in there, and all I'm looking at are weeping eyes and heads hung crying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And particularly on the female side, and a lot on the male side too, when it came to the babies being born dependent, right? So one of the young ladies in there raised her hand and she said, Dr. Loyd, and these are her words, not mine. She said, Dr. Loyd, because I'm an addict, does that mean that my kid is going to be an addict?
What'd you say?
And I got to give her a great answer, right? It's a really good one. No, it's no. Answer to that's no. Does your child have your genetics? Yes. Is that a risk? Yes. What is going to determine this child's path forward? How you parent from the time you get out of here, right?
Right.
That environment that you raise them in. My son was talking the other day because he works with me, and he was talking about it. He's never seen me drink a beer or take a pill. He was so young, he doesn't even remember it. In his life, he didn't grow up like that. He wasn't abused. He wasn't exposed to the stuff I would have exposed him to. And now he has a daughter, and I have a granddaughter, Cece. Cece, just one generation removed from my genetic mess of addiction and my
Yeah.
She'll never see any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's prevention.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand is that when they treated me, right, you not only treated me, you treated my wife, you treated my 2 kids, heck, you treated my granddaughter. It's a generational thing, and I think we have to start looking at that. I see people get short-sighted with it all the time, and they want to show a change in a 2 or 4 year election cycle, and that's just too short-sighted.
Wow, what an amazing story you have. I want to just backtrack a little bit because I was listening to an interview with you just recently, and it was your dad that helped you get into recovery, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? And there was a moment, right? I think you were in your car, you were going hiking. Tell us about that.
That one's hard to forget. So my dad did intervene on me. You know, I didn't have those consequences where I got in trouble with law enforcement. That was another thing in Dopesick. He got in trouble with law enforcement. I never had that. But you know, dad saw changes in me, and really it's actually a neat story. I haven't told it very much. Me and my sister were estranged at the time. Our parents had got divorced when we were older. I was 28, Beck was 26. And we kind of held each other responsible for that. And we didn't talk to each other for about a decade, which is sad. Beck's one of my best friends and I love her, and I didn't handle it well. And I would think that Beck would probably tell you she didn't handle it well. Her name's Becky. I'm sorry, I call her Beck. But Beck would tell you she probably didn't handle it well either. But my sister had seen me out in town, and keep in mind, we hadn't talked in a long time, and I didn't see her. And she got concerned because I didn't look like the brother that she grew up with. And she called my dad, and my dad started looking into it. And you got to know my dad. I mean, first of all, my dad's the only Democrat in East Tennessee, and he doesn't care. And so it's pretty funny the way he goes about his life. But he just always believed in addressing things. He believed in getting back up when you've been knocked down. And he's been knocked down a few times in his life. And he always instilled that in me and my sister. He never gave us any of that, you know, racial bigot stuff that you see so often. My dad never exposed me or my sister to any of that. And he was a great dad, but he noticed a difference, you know, when Becky said something to him about it, and he started digging, and he couldn't get anybody to help him because everybody was protecting me. Because they didn't really know what was going on, but they didn't want to seem like anything was going on because they didn't want to hurt my career. And I understand that. Believe me, I understand that. And I wasn't an ass, right? I didn't throw scalpels, and I wasn't mean to people. I still had, right? And so I was going to take my son down to meet my dad to go hiking. And I used to carry my pills just in the drink holder in my my truck. I'm an East Tennessee boy. I got a 4-wheel drive truck. So I just carried it, and I didn't care who saw them. Nobody ever said anything to me about it. And so there's, 250 pills in the drink holder. It looked like an ice cream cone. And so my son got out of the truck and walked around with my dad to go hiking. And I could have swore my dad walked away. And I reached over and I grabbed a handful of pills and threw them in my mouth. And when I turned around, Dad was standing at the window of my truck. And he looked at me and he said, "Steve," he said, did you just take a handful of pills? And I told him, you know what I told him? No, I know he saw me. And he shook his head okay, and he walked off. So the next day when I got home from work, I turned the corner and my house was up on a hill, and I saw his truck sitting in my driveway. I knew what he was there for. Believe me, I knew. So he said, "Hey, we're going to go see your sister." And I said, "I don't want to see her." He said, "We're going to see your sister, Steve." I said, "All right." So I got in the truck with him. We're headed up the interstate, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Steve," he said, "Do you have a drug problem?" I said, "No, Daddy, I don't." I said, "I'm working a lot. I'm trying to pay back my med school loans, and I got multiple jobs. I'm just tired." He shook his head. Okay. We drove probably another 2-3 miles, not very far. And he put his hand over on my left knee. He was driving, and he was crying. He said, "Steve," he said, "you have a drug problem." That was a statement. That was not a question. And in all honesty, I felt like a drowning man out in the ocean that suddenly out of nowhere, somebody showed up with a boat and slung me a life preserver. And I said, "Yeah, Daddy, I do." I said, "I'm going to lose everything I got." I said, "I'm going to lose my house, my cars. I'm going to lose my medical license. I'm going to go to jail." And he said, "Steve," he said, "none of that stuff is going to do you any good if you're dead." And I didn't have an answer for that. That's 20 years later. I still don't have an answer for that one. And we walked in, and my sister was there, and she gave me a big hug, and we sat down to the computer and literally Googled, how do doctors get help with addiction? And found out that in our program, in our state, the great state of Tennessee, that we had one of the best physicians' health programs in the United States. And I called a guy named Roland Gray, and my life started to change from that moment on.
Wow, that's amazing. I thank God for your dad and for recognizing that and being there for you. And congratulations on your sobriety and recovery. It's amazing what you're doing and you're giving back. I want to thank you. And we're just actually at a mid-wrap right now. We're going to take a little PSA break. For everyone tuning in, we'll be right back with Dr. Stephen Loyd. You are listening to WUSB Stony Brook 90.1 and 107.3 FM. We'll be right back.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is often laced into illicit drugs and used to make fake versions of prescription pills. You can't see it, taste it, or smell it. Suppliers mix fentanyl into their products because it's potent and cheap, and the dealer might not even know. Keep yourself and others safe by knowing the real deal on fentanyl. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Play It Forward. You are listening to WUSB Stony Brook. I'm Allison. We are so happy and have the honor and privilege to have Dr. Stephen Loyd with us today. We're going to pick up right where we left off. You were just talking about how your dad was a huge part of your recovery. What was the lowest point of your recovery? I mean, you did bring up a couple of those times to us.
Yeah, there's a lot, and it's kind of hard to rank them. There's a couple that stand out to me, and I've had people tell me before, "Hey, you didn't have a very low bottom."
Really?
Right? Yeah, because it didn't go to jail. I didn't do some of these other things, and I'll tell you this, and for that part, they're right. Comparatively speaking, I really didn't. But towards the end, I was going to bed half the nights praying that I wouldn't die, and the other half praying that I would die. That's a pretty low bottom.
That really is. Wow.
It is. I knew how much I was taking. I knew I could just stop breathing. I mean, I knew it. I just couldn't quit. And so I think about that a lot. We were, back then, I was on an academic track in my medical career. I wanted to be the dean of the med school, actually, and was progressing nicely for my age. And obviously, that got turned on its ear. And I still could have pursued that track, but once I got into addiction, I didn't want to do anything other than this. I knew what God put me on the earth for, and I know it every day. But we start out rounds in the morning. I teach medical students and medical residents and pharmacy students, pharmacy residents, and we start out rounds. You all have seen it on TV, like some of the TV shows you see it depicted on. I call it the wandering mass of dullness, but at any rate, that's how we teach. And we always start out in the intensive care unit, and we start out with our sickest patient first that morning. And my resident, Scott Brown, never forget him, love him to this day. Scott had our patient, and she had overdosed on Tylenol. And people don't realize it, but that's a common thing, right? If you want to try to hurt yourself, that's not a bad way to do it. Tylenol can
for your liver.
Yeah.
Right. I remember you saying that.
Absolutely. And so we had a lady, she was on the ventilator, she was young, and we were going to life flight her to Vanderbilt, which is about 4 hours west of where we were in East Tennessee. And so I looked at Scott and I said, how many did she take? And the number he told me was less than the number I was taking basically on a daily basis.
Wow.
All right. And so I couldn't, now difference for her, she took them all at once. I'm taking them spread out, but still it was a toxic dose of Tylenol. And you think, golly, Steve, you were worried about the Tylenol and you were doing all that oxycodone? Absolutely. The Tylenol will for sure kill you. There's no question. And I remember him giving me that number and realizing that I was taking more than that every day. And we still had paper charts back then. And I had my pen in my hand and I couldn't force my hand down to the chart to write my note. I was so rattled. And I looked at everybody and I said, hey, I tell you what, let's just round on our own today, which I never did. Maybe the only time in my career I did it. And I walked to the end of the ICU in the Johnson City Medical Center, and there's bathrooms there. And I walked in the bathroom. I closed and locked the door. I sat down on the toilet and started crying. Because I thought I was going to die and nobody was going to know why.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't tell anybody. That was a pretty bad day.
Wow. I find it amazing that you were able to hide this. Actually, you must have hid it quite well.
my personality is such that I wasn't mean. Believe me, I got a lot of other faults of your listeners. We can go through them, pages and pages of it. I've never been mean or greedy. And I wasn't mean in the hospital. I didn't talk bad to staff. I didn't talk bad to the people working in the hospital. And of course, I never talked bad to our nurses. Heck, our nurses taught me everything I know. And so I just wasn't like that. And so they kind of protected me, in all honesty. And they saw things like I was meticulous about my medical records. I still am. I don't go home at night until my records are done. I don't care how late I got to stay. And it started to pile up, right? I started to get behind on my medical record keeping, and I started to keep odd hours, and they made excuses for me. Not their fault. They were very loving and very protective of me. But I did keep it hidden for a really long time.
Yeah, and we're able to keep it hidden for a little while at least, and then eventually the wheels, kind of start to come off the train, and it's just a matter of time before everything is found out, and we can keep up a charade for so long, but eventually people are able to see through it.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Usually it's our loved ones that have seen us for so long, and they eventually begin to notice the change, and they start to see us begin to slip, and they notice the things that we think that we're hiding, but ultimately the cracks begin to show, and people are able to pick up on it.
Yeah, Kurt, and I see this a lot, and this is what I keep trying to tell people, because I run into all these folks that have these ideas about what people need to get into recovery, right? Tough love, 3 strikes and you're out. Come on. I don't even know how to define most of those, and so, there's really, we only have one solid predictor of long-term recovery. All right. And that's time engaged in the program. That's it. Okay. So if you get to 1 year in recovery, your chances of getting to 15 years are right at double digits, right? 8 to 10%. Right. You get to 5 years, your chances of getting to 15 plus are about 80%.
And that is just such a huge difference, Steve, from single digits up to 80%. And I think that really just speaks volumes to why we need to have long-term treatment for people. Like you said before, I think that's really the most important, and it really gives people the best chance of success.
Yeah, it's massive, Kurt. If you look at doctors and who have my issue, and believe me, guys, they're out there, and I promise you got them on Long Island. I'll guarantee it. All right.
Steve, if we have so many doctors that are dealing with this as well, why don't we know about them? Why aren't we hearing about them? Why aren't there more people like you who have a platform, who have lived experience on both ends of the spectrum? Why are they not coming out and talking about this? We need to hear from them. And we need to hear from them because they're the ones that have access to better care. You and I have talked before about the doctors that come forward that they have a problem, and the level of care that they receive and the help that they get in getting to that level of care, which most people out on the street, most regular people, your average Joe, does not have access to. And there was a study that you talked about describing the percentages of that, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Get scared, right? The stigma associated with it. I just made up my mind I wasn't going to live my life like that anymore. And but the study actually came from a guy at UCLA. It's HSER. I think it's pronounced Heiser. But I was pretty angry when I looked at the study. I was like, well, that's obvious. But, it's not obvious. If you look at doctors who are in recovery, the recovery rate for physicians with drug or alcohol problems is around 78 to 95% at 5 years. You know why? It's not because they're smarter than everybody else. I'm a member of that group. I can promise you that's not true. But it's about access to quality treatment, resources, and aftercare. So our contract that I signed was for 5 years. The reason it was for 5 years that I'd be drug screened and all these things that I quote, had to do, attended to meetings, caduceus groups, those things like that. Because the people doing that knew that they could get you to 5 years. Your chances of getting to 15 were about 80-some%, right?
And that's a great investment.
It is a great investment. And so when I got to 5 years, Kurt, I could tell you this, because the one thing I have done, I think I'm proud of this. I've kept my eyes open, and I've looked and seen what I said. And so what I saw was, I looked at the doctors who weren't successful, right? They get to 5 years and then have trouble. Well, the reason they had trouble was they got out of what they did in those 5 years. It kind of like, I got to this 5 year mark and I'm good. Well, kind of, right? Do you have to have the same intensity you did at 3 years? Probably not. Do you still need to be engaged with recovery?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And there was one guy that really bothered me because he got to that mark and he disappeared. And we all loved him. He was an anesthesiologist. And then the next time we heard of him was a couple of years later. He pulled a gun on a young person at a McDonald's where he lived, and then about a year later died of liver failure. And those are the kind of things I couldn't get in my mind. So when I got to the 5-year mark, I was like, well, heck, I've never been this successful in my entire life. So I'm just going to keep doing all those things I did in those 5 years. And guys, at 20 years, I still do them.
And I'm so glad that you said that, Steve, because that's such an important piece that I think is so overlooked and really probably speaks to why there are not even more people in long-term recovery. And that's because we get lazy. We stop doing what we were taught. We stop doing what we were doing in the beginning. You know, if you're going to the gym and you're seeing results, you're not going to stop going to the gym, right? And that's what we need to remember in recovery, is that we got to where we are by doing what we were told to do, what we learned, and we can't give up on that. We can't lose that intensity or that tenacity.
Absolutely, Kurt. And your analogy is such a good one. The gym analogy is so good. It's so true.
Honestly, Steve, I feel like I might have gotten the gym analogy from you at one point.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to now, but I'll credit you. It's a great analogy, but yeah, that, you know, it's about community and relationship. Same thing. That's why I love coming up there so much with you guys, right? And the support you've got on, let's see, I thought I would never forget the 2 counties. I know Nassau County is one of them.
Suffolk County.
And the other was okay. So I was close. I can't pronounce the name of some of those towns on Long Island. I don't know where y'all came up with, but you know, when I was there and I saw that community, I mean, that's the kind of thing that starts to move the needle. Okay. And it's about community and relationship. And I'd like to tell you that's mine. But the first time I ever saw that was from the author, Johann Hari. And he wrote a book called Chasing the Scream, which I thought was just fantastic. And it is about community and relationship. And so do I still do things with the same vim and vigor that I did at 2 years deep in recovery? No. All right. I mean, the first 5 years, I went to 3 meetings a day, every day, because I was scared to death. Okay. Do I still go to 3 meetings a day? No. Do I still go to meetings? Yeah. I do, because it helps me. My friends are in recovery, and we had a great night this past Saturday night. And I got to tell you all this because this is just too good. Okay. But one of the places I told you about in Nashville that treat women, or another one's called Mending Hearts. And Mending Hearts this past Saturday night had a prom. Okay. You tell me how good that is.
That's great.
Right. You bet. And me and a bunch of my recovery buddies, we all went. And I had a blast. These young ladies had prom dresses and hair and makeup and perfume and all the stuff, right? And I took pictures all night long. I was the photographer. And you talk about a great night. I mean, how fun was that? And I got permission to use the video because I'm going to show it to my abatement counsel, because almost all those women have been in jail.
Wow.
All of them have been beat their entire lives and abused in every way you can imagine. And then to be able to see them in that environment, you know, doing the dances and all the prom stuff, right? That's the kind of stuff that I want people to see. And it's so important, but that community and that relationship, Kurt, is what is key. And sometimes it comes in 12-step groups, and I love that. And sometimes it comes outside of 12-step group. My buddies that I went to the prom with, one of them rented a stretch limo, and we got in the back of it. And the driver obviously knew we were all in recovery, so it was stocked with Celsius instead of liquor. And I asked him at the end of the night, I said, man, when's the last time you went out in this limo? Because it's Nashville, and Nashville, guys, is a party city, I promise you. I said, when's the last time you went out all night and nobody drank or did drugs in the back of this thing? He said, this might be the first.
Wow.
But that environment, right? We were all there together.
Yeah.
And everybody in the back of that limo had been in recovery double-digit years. And we're still all pulling in that direction, right? And I think that's important, to surround yourself with these folks, because we had a blast. We had a great time. And I think that's what people, can't see. They can't see those relationships.
And those relationships are so important, Steve. And that's, just recently the guys at Hope House went on a river rafting trip, and they went camping for 2 nights, and hearing them come back and the stories that they told, it was heartwarming. These guys, they form great relationships while they're doing these things. And I remember when I was in early recovery, taking a theme group, and it was fun in recovery. And we all came up with things that we wanted to do when we were sober and out there in the real world. world and things that we never really thought that we would ever do. And one of the things that is so great about Hope House is every year is the annual ski trip. And I have such fond memories of that. And I made and formed such great relationships on those trips. And, these are people that I've been friends with for the last 8 years. And I know I'll be friends with for the next, I'd like to say 80 years, but that's probably not realistic. And I think that that's such an important piece of recovery is forming these relationships because they're your support group, like you said before.
And Kurt, I just maintain those relationships.
That's amazing. Actually, what you're both describing, I read a study about the things that make human beings the happiest in your life are your relationship and your community, your relationships with friends and family. And there's nothing that can replace that or even comes close to that. And so when you talk about these women that were in jail and now they're experiencing a prom, they're experiencing something they probably never thought they would. And so just that feeling of being part of what's normal is what helps them make these changes and maintain it.
Steve, I don't know if you can relate to this at all because your substance use kicked on later on in life. But, I feel like for me, I started so young that it became such a part of my identity and it was how I coped with everything. And, if I felt like I didn't belong and so I would be able to numb to it. And I feel like I missed out on so much of life. And I just wonder how you can relate to that.
Well, it's funny, Kurt, because I felt like I didn't belong either. But I had an opposite approach and, growing up. And my approach was I just became whatever I needed to in that group, the old chameleon. And in the process, I lost who I was. So I used my personality to keep people at a distance. I could be funny. I could be engaging. And if I could do that well enough, I could keep you out here so that you couldn't see me. And, I used that to my advantage for a really, really long time. And so I still have those personality traits and I like those. I think they're good. But now, absolutely, right, use it for good instead of manipulation. And it's hard to do, right? That's a hard thing to look in the mirror and tell yourself, hey, this is what you're doing, buddy. Golly, it's tough, right? I want to blame somebody else so bad. It's just it never worked for me. And when I looked at the real issue most of the time was me. And so I still have those personality traits, but also understand the importance of vulnerability and being in meaningful relationship. I remember when Chip Dodd, the guy that saved my life, I got to mention his name. I love you, Chip. Chip said, Steve, this is easy. We're going to feel our feelings, tell the truth, and turn it over to the process, God. I was like, oh, yeah, whatever, Sounds good. And I'll tell you what, most true thing anybody ever told me.
And one piece that I did want to touch upon, Steve, is the lack of education that anybody in the medical field receives. I think it's kind of ironic that the people that are treating us have such little education regarding substance use disorder or even, prescription, prescribing of pills. Anybody with a pad should have way more education about this than they do. It's honestly kind of embarrassing.
I remember talking with you about it. Embarrassing. I talked about it yesterday. I was in front of the Alabama Independent School Association yesterday in South Alabama. Talked to them about this very subject.
Medical students, but dental students, right?
Oh yeah, anybody that has pen and a pad, although we're computer now, but it's really unbelievable. I'll make this argument, and I think it sticks. This is the number one health problem in the United States. Okay, and people say, "Oh, heart disease, cancer." No, it's actually this. You don't believe me? How many people die secondary to their nicotine addiction? Right, throw that one in there, and how many of those heart attacks and strokes were caused by smoking. And so it's amazing to me that, we'll talk about low success rates with smoking cessation. Well, we don't understand anything about addiction. How in the world are we ever going to help anybody with it? We got a drug here. We hand them that. The drug can stop cravings, right? And that's a good thing, right? We got a drug that does it. Varenicline, right? Chantix. It works in the brain like Suboxone does, right? Cuts down your cravings to smoke cigarettes. But if you don't have a way to handle the things that were driving you to the cigarette, right? Good luck.
Yeah.
I tell people, and I want to talk about it because I think it's so important to understand nicotine. Nicotine has about a 4-hour half-life. Okay, which means that or half-life is it takes about 4 hours for the nicotine to get out of your system. So if you're awake in 16 hours, right, and sleep 8, you need 4 cigarettes a day. All right. How many people smoke 4? Nobody. Right? They smoke 20. And so these things come up in their day that drives them to that. Eat, bad interaction at work, somebody cut you off in traffic, whatever. Okay. Until you start to learn how to handle those things without grabbing a cigarette, your chances of stopping are pretty low. And doctors don't understand anything that I'm talking about, right? They think if you can put enough bad consequences out there that somebody will stop. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. I've seen people smoke through a trach. Not going to happen. You've got to understand addiction. You've got to understand what's driving it. You've got to be able to help people deal with things on basically, Kurt, what we learn, life on life's terms, right?
I just wish there was more information and news reports about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which really, if you think about it, is probably one of the number one causes or predetermining factors for addiction.
It is. And, it's like, I told you about our wonderful women at Mending Hearts this past weekend. And I got to know a lot of them Saturday night. And the story is universal. All right. We go back and this is what I don't want people to take away from this. This is not an excuse. I'm not sitting here making excuses for somebody. For me, when I learned this, it took the burden off of me because I was in self-pity and thought I was just a worthless piece of crap. I didn't realize that genetics, trauma, and opportunity had put me where I was. So once I understood that, I explained it like a diabetic. A diabetic can eat chocolate cake all they want until they figure out they have diabetes. And then when they start to learn about diabetes, then the chocolate cake is on them, right? And this is kind of the same thing. As I learned this, I was like, oh gosh, I see this. I see how I got here. I'm not blaming anybody. There's actually action that I can take to come out onto this. I'm a believer in the 12 steps. I think it's a great way to live your life. I just do. Even if you don't have any addiction, it's just a great way to live your life.
Yeah. Okay.
But this is the part that I don't like about it. The first step says I am powerless. Now, what that really means is when I use this substance, I'm powerless. But just taking on face value, I'm powerless. We are not powerless. We have great resilience and strength and decision-making capacity, right? We all do. And so I don't want people to use that as the crutch. I'm powerless. No, you're not. You have the ability to take action. You have the ability to, when you seek help, to get help with some of these underlying drivers. And the big one is trauma, physical, sexual, emotional abuse. Now, I talk about it a lot as children, but even as adults, it can come into play. And I think it's really the thing that we overlook and that we don't put enough resources to is helping people, first of all, understand the role. And then second of all, that there's actually effective treatment for it.
Wow. That's a lot. And I want to learn more about that myself because I think it's a very important component, because it does go along with prevention. You just have to be able to recognize the signs in young people.
Allison, this is the thing that is, I think sometimes they're uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
But the people I take care of, I do a trauma history every time. And I don't have to do a whole lot. I don't have to get graphic. I don't have to go, I just need to know, is it there? And so one of the things that, that I do is like, instead of coming out and saying, hey, were you ever physically, sexually, or emotionally abused? Right. But hey, tell me what it was like growing up in your house.
Well, you only know what you know, right?
Right. Well, I had this patient a while back that told me what a great childhood they had, and it was just amazing. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh gosh, this, I've seen those before, right? They do exist. It kind of appears out of the blue, but yeah, right. But a few weeks later, she's telling me this story and tells me about her dad putting a cigarette out on her chest. And I was like, oh, I stopped. I was like, hey, hang on a second. It was like in passing. And for her, it was normal, right?
I was just going to say it's normal to her.
Me growing up in East Tennessee, we look great in church, right? Sunday morning, my mom played the piano. My dad's an elder and a deacon in the church. We look great in the family photo. Okay, it was World War III, going to church and coming home from church, and it was a nightmare. But I thought that was normal, right? Doesn't everybody live like that? Doesn't everybody have this face?
Yeah.
At some degree, they do, right? They do have this face they show everybody else, but you don't get to know what's going on in my home. I slept under my bed until I was 15 or 16 years old because I was scared. right?
Wow.
For me, that was my normal. And I had a patient not long ago in her intake told me about sleeping under her bed. And it was the first time that I'd ever told anybody about me. It was with her. I stopped dead in my tracks and I was like, oh my gosh. I said, I don't know how many intakes I've done over the past, how many every years, thousands. And that one just smacked me between the eyes because I did the exact same thing. And so it becomes normalized, right? I don't know how many times I get into this and they describe this perfect family that they grew up in. And then once I get to know them, I start to see that this perfect family had all kinds of secrets and emotional manipulation and a lot of times physical and sexual abuse. And sometimes when you're dealing with families and you start to tell them like this, when they're their kid, oh, my kid never faced any of this. Here's the deal. You don't know what your kid, but you don't know what the neighbors or somebody at school or a teacher or the church, right? I mean, we don't have to even delve into that one, right?
Yeah.
So we don't know. And it's a lack of control thing. We don't have control over each other. Even as kids, we think we do, but we don't. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know what they're exposed to. We don't know what they're scared to tell us. And really what I've done is just have the courage to ask. How many of my patients have told me nobody's ever asked?
Yeah. Yeah. There's still stigma with this because a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about this, but it's people like you that are putting it out in the forefront, especially as a medical doctor. I hope that you're encouraging and inspiring medical professionals to speak out more and to really get to know their patients more. And really what it comes down to is empathy and compassion.
No doubt.
And kindness.
Yeah. This is going to sound kind of crude, but I believe it. Back when I was teaching all the time, I used to tell our young residents, because they come out of medical school into residency and they've had 4 years of training. And the truth is they really don't know anything. I mean, they've got some book knowledge, but they haven't taken practical care of patients. And I used to tell them on the first day of residency, and I mean this, and I don't want it to sound dumb. I did it to kind of be funny, but I said, I can teach dumb. I can't teach. I don't give a shit. And I can't. And when I say dumb, you know, I'm using that as a joke. I can teach a lack of knowledge. I can teach a knowledge deficit, and I can help you be successful. If you don't care about what you're doing, I cannot help. It's interesting. You said that. Y'all were laughing at my microphone and our stuff we have here, but when I get done with you guys, we actually this afternoon we have a planning for a training I'm putting together because I've got providers that I need to teach how to talk to patients.
Steve, I'm so glad that you said that. There is not enough of that. I'll give you the perfect example of why we need this to happen. There was a client, this kid Matt, he's a friend of mine, had maybe 2 years clean, I think. He relapsed on fentanyl. Long story short, he went into precipitated withdrawals, and I had to bring him to the emergency room, right? He was going to go back into detox. He was out on a little run. And the intake nurse was sitting there with us doing the intake and says to him, so how long did you have clean? And Matt said, I had whatever it was, 2 or 3 years. And he goes, you had 2 or 3 years. And do you know what fentanyl is? And Matt says, yeah, I do. And he goes, you know what fentanyl is, and you had 2 or 3 years clean and you decided to go back out anyway? And Steve, I almost went nuts. I could not believe what I was hearing. Here's this person, these nurses are literally the gatekeepers between who gets into treatment. And, if that was me sitting there and I didn't have somebody sitting there holding my hand, I would have said, screw this, screw you, I'm out of here.
Kurt, my kids got me one of these rings for my birthday last month. It's a Aura ring and it does your heart rate and all this stuff. Yeah, I just looked over at my phone to see what time it was because when we get done, I want to go back and look to see what my vital signs just did when you told that story. Because it's going to go straight up. I mean, it's like a lie detector test. My whole head's turning red. That's somebody that has absolutely no idea what they're talking about. And, people have the hardest time. And one of the stories I use in my talk is a young lady who had open heart surgery for endocarditis, who was addicted to heroin and using heroin and fentanyl. And so about $500,000, 2 weeks in the hospital. I say, how long did it take her to use when she got out of the hospital? And you and Allison both know the answer is the same day, right? Because we didn't do anything to treat the underlying disorder, which was addictive disease. And people are shocked by that. And I said, you're shocked by it because you're in your right mind. Okay. Somebody who is addicted, their brain chemistry has changed. They lack insight or judgment around this. It's about the reward system and surviving. And I said, and you'll do anything to survive. I said,
Yeah.
that her using in the parking lot the day she got out, to me, is predictable. I understand that. I want to use that.
Steve, it's predictable, but more importantly, it's preventable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the big one, Kurt. Right. I'm not going to tell you I know it's going to happen. I'm going to show you how to prevent it.
Yeah. But the first part is understanding it and educating yourself about it. And we're talking about the doctors.
And it's, some of the neuroscientists out there who I love, and we need their research work, and I get it. And they hear me talk about addiction, and I'm sure they roll over in their graves of how I make it sound. I've got to be able to help people practically understand what these people are figuring out, right? I can't go in there and start talking about nucleus accumbens and ventral tegmental tract, right? I can't do that, right? Nobody's going to listen to that, right? I've got to show them, hey, I understand what's going on here. And here's what I see based on my experience and things that they can understand. I use Krispy Kreme donuts and sex. People get those two things. Okay. And if we can do that and start to help people understand it a little bit. I had a nurse one time tell me about my work in the addiction field. She goes, Steve, I don't know why you do this. She goes, these people just need to quit. They don't have any willpower. We had this thing of chocolates sitting on the corner desk, and I love her. I love her to death. I'd give her a kidney to this day. One of my favorite people in the world. She could not walk by that and not eat that chocolate. It was impossible. I could have tied her hands together, and she would. And finally, one day, I said, hey, Carol, you can't walk past that chocolate. She goes, I know. I'll try. And I said, okay, now here's what I want to tell you. And I used that to start to teach her about addiction. Okay. And she could relate to it because it was chocolate, and she knew she was going out and walking 2 miles at lunch and coming in and eating 5 Hershey bars right after it. And so, when people start to understand that, and they get a better feel for it because they can relate to it in their own lives. And that's why I try to teach it like I do.
As we are getting close to wrapping up, there's one thing that I don't want us to not talk about. And you came up not too long ago. We got to spend some time with you here on Long Island. You were gracious enough to come up for Fentanyl Awareness Day on May 7th. And we had a great dinner with you. And you shared a story about a patient of yours. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners that story, because I think it really is powerful. I know that we were all moved by it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gonna happen here soon. So I had a patient years ago that, and she'll let me use her name too. Her name is Kenitha. I had a patient years ago that came in and out numerous times. I loved her through it all. I can't count the number of relapses. There are too many. And, but every time she came back, I was so glad to see her, and I loved her, and I tried my best to help her, and eventually lost her. She didn't die, but she stopped coming back. And so I lost her for a number of years. I sent my son up to Knoxville, which is about 4 hours east of where I am, to look at an emergency department program a couple of years ago. And he called me up and he said, hey, Dad, he said, you're going to love this program. And which freaked me out because my son hates everything. And he starts telling me about this program. And he said, oh, by the way, the peer support specialist they use to go down to see the patients in the emergency room told me to tell you hi, and she loves you. I said, what's her name? He said, her name's Kenitha. And I about came unglued. I said, tell me you got her number. He said, yeah, I got it. Sent it to me. I called her immediately, and Kenitha and I reconnected there. She found recovery from a different path, Kurt. And I talked to her about this. I said, Kenitha, when you were with me, you didn't find recovery. She goes, no. She said, Steve, I didn't. She said, but I really believe my time with you kept me alive. She said, you loved me. I always knew you loved me. And she said, and I was never scared to come back to you, which is what I wanted. And she said, I just didn't get it that time. And she went back to school. She's working for a big facility in Knoxville. And so she got in a relationship, and she's going to get married. And I actually know the guy she's going to marry. She actually did a pretty good job picking this one. And
Been so great.
she called me up and she goes, hey, Steve, she said, I'm getting married to Jeremy. And I was like, I know Jeremy, and I'm glad for you, Kenitha. And she said, I don't have any family. And I said, yeah, I know, honey. And she said, I'd like for you to walk me down the aisle. All right. And, those are the kind of things right there that, you just kind of, there are really no words for that.
Yeah.
And so the people out there listening that, may need to, take a harder look at this. I mean, these are the kind of stories that are out there. Those girls from Mending Hearts Saturday night, these are the stories that are out there. And it's not about medicine and ventral tegmental tracts and nucleus accumbens. It's about kindness, compassion, love, understanding, right? Those are the things this is about.
Well, after seeing Dopesick and now meeting you, I can tell you right now, Hulu got it right, because Michael Keaton, the way he portrayed you, was full of compassion and empathy. That was clearly evident. And what I found so incredibly touching that you told us at dinner, we asked you about two of the characters in Dopesick, and it turned out they were both real, and you would drive them to the facility, just like in the show.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah. That's, most everybody in that series was a real person. And, but the two that you mentioned, that for sure happened, and did drive them to the facility. But you can have heartbreak in this field, as you all know. I mean, nobody knows it like the ladies of Long Island. You know how I met you all in DC, and then Carol sending me the letter that I think she probably said she didn't know if anybody would respond or not. I still can't believe it found me, but it did. And how I got to come back to Long Island. I mean, how do you look at a group of moms like you guys and tell them to go away or tell them you can't help? I mean, I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that either, Steve. And like you said, after meeting these women, I would have a very hard time telling any of them no. They are all forces to be reckoned with that have experienced such loss, and their objective is to make sure that no other parent or loved one has to go through this again. That's what drives them, and that's what makes them keep going up to Albany and keep fighting and keep talking and never being quiet.
I've got the picture we took on my desk, just 50 feet from where I'm sitting right now, and I need to look up sometimes because I get discouraged and I get defeated, and I have a piece of policy go against what I know we're going to need or whatever. And most of those times, probably 90% of them, it's about my ego. And, I have to take a look at that. But then all I have to do is glance over and, at the picture and go, hey, the juice is worth the squeeze here. There are people out here that are battling and they're doing what they can do. And, the least I can do is try my best to help.
Well, you're moving mountains. That's what we like to say. You're doing God's work for sure. And we are so incredibly grateful to have gotten to know you and to have this opportunity to talk with you. I encourage everyone to check out Dopesick because it's an amazing story, or read Macy's book. But before we wrap it up, Stephen, is there anything else that you want our listeners to really know, to take away with?
Yeah, there's the thing that I close with is addiction is treatable, treatment works, and people recover. That's true.
There you go.
In every sense of the word. And that's what I just want you to keep in your mind. And there's no set number of how many chances you get.
And compassion and kindness.
I'm going to leave you guys with one of my favorite quotes. And I hope I get it right. Well, I'll get the quote right, maybe not the person. It's from a rabbi from about the 11th century. And he's talking about the Bible. And he said, love your neighbor as yourself. The rest of the Bible is just commentary.
Wow. Everyone think about that.
Those are words to live by.
If I do that today, my guess is my day will be pretty good.
I think so. I think you're spot on with that. I want to thank you, Dr. Stephen Loyd. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Congratulations on your sobriety. Thank you for the efforts and the difference that you're trying to make, particularly in the medical community.
Yeah, Steve, I definitely want to second that. It has been such a great experience. I love talking to you when you were up here. I know the ladies did as well. I love talking to you before the show. Really just getting to pick your brain has been such a learning experience and really just an honor.
Yeah.
I did. I love the ladies, and I loved you as well. And your Grateful Dead shirt today has, my heart, for sure. So
well, we're going to have to get out to Tennessee to check out your hometown, but I want to thank you again for your time today, and I sincerely thank everyone who supports our cause and understands how important it is to look out for each other and to empathize with anyone you know struggling or dealing with addiction or substance misuse. Let's continue to spread awareness about the dangers of illicit fentanyl and promote harm reduction tools like Narcan and fentanyl test strips. Reach out to us via Instagram at sbu.playitforward for more recommendations. This is Allison with a special episode of Play It Forward. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Kurt. And of course, thank you again, Dr. Stephen Loyd.
Yes, thank you, Steve.
You are listening to WUSB Stony Brook 90.1 and 107.3 FM. Be well, everyone, and please look out for one another.